unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you can by no means enter into the kingdom of heaven. This is, again, this is the main focus of what the Sermon on the Mount is all about. This is the thesis statement that is given by Jesus. This is how we are to understand all of the things that Jesus is saying throughout. And so when you get into chapter 5, and in chapter 5, remember, this is where he's... I feel like I'm hearing a lot of me. Is this loud right now? Bruce, can we just back it off just? Thank you very much. Sorry. I messed Bruce up because I didn't have my mic on when I first started off, so that's my fault there, not Bruce's, just to make sure everybody knows I had to turn my mic on. But yeah, when Jesus starts off on the Sermon on the Mount, and he makes sure that we understand, this is a comparison about those bad leaders in the first century of the Jewish people who were leading them off in the wrong direction, leading them off into destruction. He says you have to be greater than that. Your righteousness must go beyond that. Chapter 5, you have to understand that their teaching doesn't go deeply enough. They don't have a full grasp on what God meant when he gave the law of Moses and all of these various things. And then in chapter 6, he describes them as actors who are just simply performing. They're coming out and they're doing a role in their performance. They're acting like somebody who loves their neighbor as they love themselves in the giving of alms. They're acting like somebody who loves God with all their heart, soul, strength, and mind as they pray in the synagogues, heaping up many words and being there in the most high volume area in the synagogues or on the street corners so they can be seen by men. That's why Jesus starts off chapter 6, beware of practicing your righteousness before others to be seen by them. Because when you do so, if that's the reward that you're seeking, you're going to get it. You'll get your reward. Others will see you. They're going to pat you on the back. They're going to make you feel better. If what you got is big head syndrome, others will give you that big head. But when they do, there's nothing left for God to reward you with. You already received the reward you were looking for. Well, this morning, we're going to look at now the third time that Jesus is going to use the word hypocrite. And this time, Jesus is going to use this word in regards to their fasting, as he tells his disciples, when you fast. Good morning. Boy, it's good to be here this morning, isn't it? It's good to have this opportunity to be here together, to enjoy the fellowship that we share here together, to sing these songs together, to partake of this memorial feast together, just to have this opportunity to be here together. It's almost weird how that word has a new ring to it somehow, after us not being able to be together in this way, and yet here we are enjoying this. And I hope nobody is taking this for granted in ways that we may have in the past. And I know there are some who are joining us online, and we're really glad that you are able to join us in the Spirit. And I know that given your druthers, you'd probably rather be here with us together, and maybe at some point we will be able to be just that as well with you. So this is a really important concept for us to remember. It's just the unity that we share, the fellowship that we have, the ability for us to be here together. And I really appreciate that you have given me this morning the opportunity to open up the Word of God with you and to be able to kind of talk about something that really doesn't get a whole lot of attention when it comes right down to it, because we don't spend an awful lot of time looking at Jesus' instructions concerning when you fast. In Matthew chapter 6, starting verse 16, it says, when you fast, "Do not look gloomy like the hypocrites, because they disfigure their faces, that their fasting may be seen by others. Truly I say to you, they've received their reward. But when you fast, anoint your head, wash your face, so that your fasting may not be seen by others, but by your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you." Now, you should be used to this pattern by now. We keep seeing this pattern demonstrating itself again and again. When you do this, you should do it in such a way that it's not a performance for other people to see, like those hypocrites. Instead, you should do it this way. This is the pattern that we saw with the giving of alms. This is the pattern that we saw with, as well, praying. And now we see the exact same pattern here. And it starts off the same way as the others as well, when you fast. Remember, he said when you give alms or when you pray. And we made the statement, this is a moral imperative that we're dealing with. This isn't just Jesus saying, hey, this is a nice thing to do. He's actually saying, when you do this, as in, I'm assuming that this is something that you are going to do. And this one might be a little weird to think about in this way, simply because we don't usually talk about fasting in this way. So let's put a pin on this, and let's come back to this idea in just a little bit. But let's talk about the rest of the stuff that Jesus says right here. He says, when you fast, do not be like those actors. Remember, all your translations are going to use the word hypocrite here. I don't like using that word because that's not what Jesus was getting across. I mean, it was. But remember, he's simply saying, don't be an actor. And what we've done is we've taken the word hypocrite and we've thrown a whole lot of extra stuff onto it that maybe Jesus was or was not getting across. I mean, it's all true. But really what he's saying here, this is just simply the word for actor. Don't be an actor. Don't go out there and try to play the role, play the part. Go out there and give a performance. That's all he's trying to get across when he says this. Don't look gloomy like those actors. And what is it that these hypocrites do? What is it that these actors do? Because they disfigure their faces so that their fasting may be seen by others. They do something to their faces in order to draw attention to it. The idea kind of is very much acting. It's wearing a mask, putting on a certain kind of mask that's a signal to everybody else that says, hey, I want y'all to know this is what I'm doing. And so I don't know exactly what the disfigurement is. I think you could use your imagination and figure out what is it that they might do in order to attract everyone else's looks, that as they pass, everyone looks and says, oh, well, Rabbi Jedediah, man, look at him. This must be one of his fast days. Did you see his gloomy outlook that he has? That's really the idea. That's what Jesus is getting across here. And so Jesus tells his disciples, instead of giving yourself this outward look, he says, when you fast, anoint your head, wash your face, fast in such a way that others aren't going to be able to look at you and tell. In other words, don't draw attention to this. And so, Jesus tells his disciples to this, and remember, it's been a few weeks since we really stressed this. So let me remind you of Matthew chapter 5, verse 16. Let your light shine in such a way that others may see your good works and glorify your Father who's in heaven. So as Jesus is saying all of these things that he says here in Matthew chapter 6, we have to put them in light of that statement. We have to reconcile these together. And so the point is not that Jesus says, don't ever let anybody see the good works that you're doing. Remember, this is really talking to those who are prone to big head syndrome, prone to those who want the limelight, prone to those who want others to see them, and they would get some kind of reward. And Jesus says, if that's you, if you are like the actors, if you're going out and simply doing a performance and acting, yeah, you would be far better off to just simply anoint your head. Go ahead and do the fasting. That's a moral imperative. Of course, Jesus says you're going to fast, but when you fast, make sure that you do it in such a way that you are not acting, that you are not putting on this mask as these others would suggest. So, understanding this, now you've heard for the third time talking about various actions, whether it be the giving of alms, praying, now fasting. I'm going to assume that we understand this point, that Jesus is not prohibiting, that is, fasting, and that is, he's not saying that you can never talk about it or never show, no one can ever know that you're fasting. Remember, that's not the point. So, let's talk about fasting, because this isn't something that really gets a whole lot of play as far as I can remember, especially when it comes to those in our heritage. It's interesting to note, fasting's never actually commanded. You can't go through the scriptures and find where it says you have to fast. The exception may be this phrase, to humble your soul. I like that from the New American Standard, the way that it renders us. But you find it in Leviticus chapter 16, verse 29. He says, "This will be a permanent statute for you in the 7th month. On the 10th day of the month, you shall humble your souls and not do any work." Again, this is on the Day of Atonement. This is the most holy, sacred day in the Jewish calendar. This isn't a normal feast day. The normal feast days, they would all come together, celebrate, remember something, commemorate something that took place in the past, whether it be the Passover, whether it be their wandering around in tents, whether it be, whatever the case. They would have all kinds of feasting and celebration. This is not one of those days. This is the exact opposite. This is where you see the culmination in Leviticus, all about the holiness, who the priests are, what the sacrifices are. All of this comes to a head on the Day of Atonement, and this is the most holy day of the year, where the high priest goes in and he cleanses the tabernacle with blood and all the pieces of the tabernacle. And then he takes all the sinfulness of the camp and he puts it on a goat, and he sends the goat out into the wilderness with all the sinfulness that's there, and they take it outside the camp. And then they kind of put the reset button on how just nasty of sin all of Israel is. This is the most important day of the year. This is the only time that anybody is commanded to go into the most holy place. Now, notice I didn't use the words, this is the only day that they can, because they never can. They're never allowed to just go in there. They have to go in on this day to do what they're supposed to do and then get out. It's not like they're allowed in there. They have to go in there. And I hope you can see the difference that I'm trying to stress here. It's on this day that he says you need to humble your souls. Well, it doesn't say fast in particular, but in Psalm 35, here he says, "As for me, when they were sick, my clothing was sackcloth. I humbled my soul with fasting, and my prayer kept returning to my bosom." You also have this phrase in Ezra chapter 8, verse 21. "Then I proclaimed a fast, that we might humble ourselves before our God." And so you have then this idea here, as far as fasting goes, that it may be tied to this phrase, humbling your soul. And I think there's a lot to that. That perhaps this is the idea of what fasting is all about. It's this idea of coming before God, and you are humbling yourself, remembering the dependence that you have on God. Remembering that when it comes right down to it, this is all about him as the sovereign Lord in your life and not about you. And so as you fast, perhaps there is very much this idea of humbling, humility, coming before God, recognizing you are supreme. You are worthy of all praise, worthy of all honor. And as you fast and you don't eat and you have the hunger pains that come on, they are a constant reminder to you of your need for God, your dependence for God. And it's not so much a dependence for food, which of course is a reality. Yes, there is that dependence. But it's not that you hunger and thirst for food. It's that you hunger and thirst for God. You hunger and thirst for righteousness. You hunger and thirst specifically for that relationship that you have. Now, this is not, of course, the only reason that people fast within Scriptures. You also see this idea very, very closely tied to it, but those who fast in desperation. Probably one of the most familiar passages regarding fasting comes from the book of Esther. In Esther chapter 4, starting verse 15, Esther told them to reply to Mordecai. And remember our context here, Mordecai has sent folks to Esther saying, hey, you need to go talk to the king and straighten this whole thing out regarding Haman and everything that's going to take place. And Esther says, I can't go before the king. I don't even think the king likes me anymore. And if I go before the king and he doesn't accept me, they're just going to take me and kill me. And Mordecai says, and? we don't have any other choices right now. He says, if you refuse, I'm confident God will create something else. But perhaps this is why you are in the position you are, to do this very thing. And Esther says, all right, that makes sense. So she says, go gather all the Jews to be found in Susa. Hold a fast on my behalf. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my young women will also fast as you do. Then I will go to the king, even though it's against the law. And if I perish, I perish. This is a moment of despair. You know, this isn't a wife who's approaching her husband. This is a woman that is approaching a king who has shown no interest in her for about a month, which is a very long time for a queen. The only thing that she can assume is he doesn't even like her anymore. And so if she walks up before him, it's not like a wife coming to her husband. This is someone that the king doesn't like coming before the king, who has the power to say, I didn't summon you, go kill her. In fact, she almost seems to think that's more probable than the king accepting her, because of the way that she says all of this. This is a moment of despair for her personally and for all the Jewish people. And she says, let's fast. Let's spend 3 days. That's a long fast. And this is a full, no eat, no drink fast. That's a long fast. This is one that will hurt your system, to go that long without eating or drinking. This is not an easy thing that she's asking, but that's just how desperate their situation is. It says, yeah, let's do this. Perhaps another one that we are familiar with, especially since we studied this on our Sunday nights not too terribly long ago, in Jonah chapter 3. Remember, Jonah came into the city of Nineveh and he said, 40 days the city's going to be overthrown. And he said nothing about repenting, nothing about God letting God, nothing about the ability for them to change God's mind. He just said, yeah, you guys got 40 days and you're done. But the people, based on the information that he gave, the people from the ground up, from the bottom up, they started putting on sackcloth. They started, wailing, moaning, repenting, and it got to the king. And here in verse 7, the king issued a proclamation he published through Nineveh by the decree of the king and his nobles, let neither man nor beast, herd nor flock taste anything. Let them not feed or drink water, but let man and beast be covered with sackcloth. Let them call out mightily to God. Let everyone turn from his evil way, from the violence that is in his hands. This picture right here that is given, this is a king who's saying, you know what? Maybe, perhaps, and by the way, that's what he will go on to say, perhaps this God of Jonah's will change his mind, and he won't cause our destruction, as this prophet is telling us. And so this is a moment of despair, and it's a moment of hope, trying to get the attention of God, saying, we are going to not eat, we're going to not drink, we are going to devote ourselves to conversation with you during this time period, so that you might relent. And lest we think that maybe this is just relegated to ancient times, people today still act in this way. It's been a few years ago now, but a buddy of mine and I, we were talking to this kid. He was, I can't remember how old he was. I probably should have verified with Julie. He was probably between 8 to 10 years old at the time. And he was telling us about how he fasted when his dog ran away. His dog got loose, and he was just torn up completely. And he said, I'm going to fast until we get this dog back. That's how intense his desperation was. And he said it worked. They got the dog back. And we said, wow, well, how long did you have to fast? He said, well, it was about 15 minutes. But it worked, right? And that's kind of the impression to some degree, though. You kind of have to commend the ability of saying this is a desperate situation, just as the people of old, and saying, this is how I'm going to act. I'm going to devote myself in this regard to prayer, devotion, and trying to make a change by coming before God, recognizing that I am in a desperate situation. I need your help. Now, sometimes fasting is simply a matter of focus. That somebody is so intensely focused on something in particular that they end up fasting. In other words, they don't set out to fast. They're not declaring a fast. They're not trying to fast, but it's the product of what it is that they're going through. In Deuteronomy chapter 9, Moses says, when I went up to the mountain to receive the tablets of stone, it says, I remained on the mountain 40 days and nights. I neither ate bread nor drank water. I don't think that means that Moses said, well, I'm going to go up on the mountain and fast for 40 days and 40 nights. I think it's just a matter of saying, I've got something that I'm doing that is so intense, he didn't even eat bread or drink water. Now, I think obviously God helped him in this as he was up on the mountain receiving things from God. In the midst of all of that, something supernatural is taking place. But he adds that little bit in there. During that time, I didn't even eat or drink because he was so intensely focused on what was going on. You see a very, very similar, eerily similar, almost too similar to assume it's just a coincidence in 1 Kings chapter 19. The angel of the Lord came again a second time and touched Elijah and said, arise, eat, because the journey is too great for you. So he arose, ate and drank, went in strength on that food 40 days, 40 nights to Horeb, the mountain of God. This is after the great Mount Carmel victory, when he thinks everything's great. Yahweh's back on top again. He's done the best that he possibly could. The king is shouting, Yahweh is God, everything's great. And then suddenly he gets word that Jezebel has won over the king, and nothing's changed. The people still worship Baal, and he needs to go on the run and hide again. And at this point, he kind of throws up his hands and says, I got nothing left. If that doesn't do it, there's nothing that I can. And here I am. I'm the only one. And with me, worship of Yahweh is going to go. And I can't bear that burden anymore. And he gives up. And this is when an angel comes, gives him some food, and says, yeah, you're not done yet. And he travels to Mount Horeb. By the way, Horeb is another name for Sinai. He ends up going to the very same mountain where Moses was there before God, fasting 40 days and 40 nights. And here, he does the exact same thing. Interestingly enough, it's not just these Old Testament folks who do this. Jesus himself in Matthew 4 was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. After he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, he then became hungry. Now notice that he does not go into the wilderness to fast for 40 days and 40 nights. He goes into the wilderness to go through the temptation from the devil. That's why he's there. And he is so intensely focused on what it is that's coming that he goes 40 days and 40 nights without eating anything because he is preparing for this. By the way, you should be clued in by the use of the word wilderness, even if it's not the same mountain. Remember, though, the mountain of Horeb, Sinai, is in the wilderness. You should be able to see some connections here. Another 40-day, 40-night fast that takes place here by Jesus in the same general idea place where you have, at least literally connected, with Moses and Elijah as well. And so here Jesus even does this. He fasts at this point. Keep in mind, the devil does not come to him until after that time of fasting is concluded. It says, and he became hungry. And so there's something here. There's something that we should be seeing. You can become so intensely focused that maybe not 40 days and 40 nights, but it may cause a time of fasting. Just to kind of illustrate how this might take place, I readily admit, without any shame, I am a geek, and I have no problems admitting that. There have been times in my life, in what seems like another life by now, where, yeah, I could sit down at a video game, and if I had no other obligations or anything, I could miss breakfast, miss lunch, miss supper, and play well into the night and not realize that I hadn't eaten a thing because I was so engrossed and so wrapped up in what I was doing, which was a mistake. And that's not something that should be exemplified, boys. No, that's not the way that it's supposed to be. I simply illustrate that you can do this. You can get so wrapped up in something. God does not tell us, get wrapped up in video games in such a way that you miss meals. But I think he is trying to demonstrate it's not a bad thing to get so wrapped up in your relationship with God that, yeah, you might miss a meal. You might miss another one. You might go all day without eating because you are so intensely focused, whether it's a study of the Word, whether it's intense in prayer, whether it's helping your neighbor in some kind of a way, doing something that exemplifies what the glory of God looks like. You can get so wrapped up in it that you just completely forget about other things. You forget to eat. You forget to take care of yourself in that way. And I think that's okay. That's a form of fasting that I think is exactly what's going across. He's not saying that you need to do that all the time, but he's also suggesting, I think, that is a form of what's taking place. You see, fasting, it's not commanded. But I also sometimes get the impression that we relegate fasting as something that kind of is there for those real nut job Jesus freaks. Those kinds of people that go over the top, they're the ones that'll do this kind of fasting. Well, shouldn't that be us? Shouldn't we be nut job Jesus freaks? But compared to the world standards, shouldn't they look at us and see that we care more about God, more about Jesus, more about our relationship with our sovereign than anything else? God's people throughout history have fasted. Fasting is a means of humbling ourselves before God. It helps us put ourselves in a proper place before God. It helps us have a better relationship with God. Moses fasted, Elijah fasted, all kinds of other people fasted. Folks, Jesus fasted. So how come it's not something that really gets stressed a lot in our heritage? Why is it? And maybe I'm just the minority here, and I just don't know it, because we haven't really talked about it much. But, I've been going to churches my entire life, multiple churches that I've been a part of. I can count I can count on one hand the number of times that I have purposefully fasted. Why is that in all my entire life? Why is it I don't recall lessons, classes that are focused on the importance of fasting? Usually, those discussions were when you get to this part on the Sermon on the Mount, in which it's generally said, fasting, it's not commanded, but it's probably a good idea. That's been the general basis, at least that I've understood. Why isn't fasting a practice that's done by those who lead the church, who call upon other people in important situations and important times to do this more often? Maybe in a time when we have something that is pressing against us, a big decision needs to be made, a situation is happening here or somewhere else around the world that we may call a fast in order to go to our God about it. Or if it comes time to appoint elders, the same way that we see them appointing elders in the New Testament with fasting, do we make calls to do fasting in those times as well? Maybe it's just me. And maybe after this sermon, I'm going to have a lot of you say, well, you know what? We do. Quite a bit. In fact, we did a lot until you got here, and it's kind of tapered off. So maybe you're the problem. If that's the case, I'd love to have that conversation. But I get the impression it's not just me, that I'm not the only one who kind of has viewed fasting in this way. And I think it goes back to our text in Matthew chapter 6. He says, when you fast, do not look gloomy like the hypocrites. They disfigure their faces so that their fasting may be seen by others. Truly, I say to you, they've received their reward. But when you fast, anoint your head, wash your face, so that your fasting may not be seen by others, but by your Father who is in secret. Your Father who sees in secret will reward you. I'm concerned that because there is no direct command somewhere, we don't see a command, we don't see examples. I mean, they're there, but we don't look at them maybe. And I don't know how you get around an inference here. I don't use the word necessary inference, but I think it's a logical inference when he says when you fast, that it should be a part of it. But maybe because we just, we don't see it just point blank right there, absolute, that we might have a tendency to take what Jesus is saying here and tying it to the practice of the Pharisees, as if fasting itself to some degree may be hypocritical. I'm guessing, trying to figure out exactly why it is. I'm scared the pendulum has gone so far from going away from the way the Pharisees do it, that we either just don't do it, or we make sure nobody ever knows when it's happening. And I don't think that's the point. It's not that we shouldn't ever do it, or that people shouldn't know about it. I think we could be very encouraging if we are fasting and we share that with each other. The important thing is to make sure that the heart is right, and we're not doing it to be seen by others. Remember when Jesus said, pray, go into an inner room. When you give alms, do it secretly. But that's not literally how it is we're supposed to do those things, right? Folks, again, when you fast, he uses those words, when you fast. Perhaps there is no commandment that says thou shalt fast, but Jesus certainly expected that his disciples were going to be doing this. Why would that change with us? When you fast, when we do it, we just need to have the right heart when we do it. And Jesus' warning here doesn't mean that we don't do it because we could be like the Pharisees, or we discourage other people from doing it. Just make sure that when you do it, you're doing it because of your relationship with God. We need to keep that as our focus. And I think we can and we should fast for the glory of God. And we shouldn't try to get around these words. I think that has often been the case, has been the problem. We probably should make fasting a part of our regular routine. When Jesus talked about, he gave the parable of the Pharisee and then the tax collector in the temple, and the Pharisee said, I give alms, I do all these great things, I fast twice a week. I don't think Jesus ever says that any of those things that the Pharisee does was wrong. It was the attitude behind those things. In fact, I think they were exemplary of the way that we should be in order to serve God. I'm not suggesting that anybody start a 40-day fast today. Not my point. Don't hear what I'm not saying here. I'm not even telling you that you have to do it. Again, I don't have that kind of authority. I cannot tell you what to do. But I do think when we realize our trust and our dependence upon God is waning, or when there are certain events in our lives that are just absolutely monumental, perhaps we need to include fasting in what we do so that we can be sure that we're in line with the Word of God. Throughout our lives, when we have decisions to make, things that we struggle with, or just everyday life trying to get closer to Him, whatever it is, we should be people of prayer, people of dedication and devotion, and people of fasting. Let's pray together. Our great and amazing Father, hallowed is your name. We thank you for the hope that we have based not on what we have done, but what you have done through your Son. Help us to remember our dependence on you in all things, to show that dependence in every facet of our lives, even in our fasting. We love you and thank you for the hope that we have through your Son. And it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.